Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome in. This evening's presentation is a really special one, a really important one, and we are so happy to have Jenna Teso here to give a presentation. I will let her introduce herself and then get started with her presentation, but thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you so much, Jenna.
Sure. Thank you, Tanya. Hello, everybody. I'm Jenna Teso. I am the mental health counselor with the Health Sciences Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which is a very, very long title and department to have to say. So I serve students, obviously, in the health sciences colleges, which includes all of you lovely people. So today we're going to talk a little bit just kind of about some simple strategies that you can employ throughout your time here during this experience, just to kind of keep an eye on your mental wellness, some things to keep in mind, some simple strategies you might be able to use throughout your time here. So we'll kind of go through some strategies, kind of talk about a few warning signs that might let us know we're not doing so good. Then I'll talk to you a little bit about what my program provides, how to get in touch with me, all that good stuff. So a little bit about my background. I have been here in this position, getting ready to start my 4th year. So I started in 2019 and didn't quite get a full year in before the pandemic hit and everything kind of changed. So you know, we just kind of navigated going fully online, and it's been working out really, really well once we figured that out. My background is educationally, I have a master's in social work and a doctorate in behavioral health. I have worked in so many different places. My career just did not follow the path that I thought it was going to, just because different opportunities kept coming up that I went and explored. So I've worked in hospitals, ERs, hospice, charter schools, detention centers, community mental health. And then now I'm here, and I also have a small private practice on the side where I focus on trauma, and specifically I like to work with traumatic grief and loss. So that's a little bit about me, and let me get my screen share going. I do have a little PowerPoint to help me guide me along. So let me get that up and running, and we'll go ahead and jump right in. My slideshow always gets hidden underneath my little thing up there. There we go. All right. And I'll be watching my time. I'll try to leave a little time at the end, you know, for any questions that you have, but also feel free to just unmute yourselves at any time if you have a question about it, anything. I'm totally cool with that. All right. So welcome to a whole new world. I think I saw in Michael's email, you guys are going to be doing something after this, kind of talking about how this is going to be a different experience from maybe your undergraduate experience. So I think that that's an awesome thing to be talking about, because it really, really is so different. But that is not a bad thing. I mean, I, for one, enjoyed my graduate studies so much more than my undergrad years, because, you know, it's more focused on what you're really interested in, and you get to really kind of delve deeper into things rather than, you know, going a little bit into a bunch of topics. So it will be very, very different, which can be really scary. So it's a whole new world. And you might wonder why I have a bleak picture here. So the story behind this picture is probably about 6 years ago. I was dating my husband at the time, and we took a trip up to the Grand Canyon. And I hadn't been since I was a little girl, even though I'm a native Arizonan. He is an immigrant and was very excited to see the Grand Canyon. You know, it's very, you know, kind of iconic, of course, piece of America. I have a lot of strengths, but one of them is not like planning / attention to detail. So I didn't look at the weather at all when we went on this trip, and like we literally, like I just drove us like all those hours up. We get there, it was like almost April, so I thought the weather was gonna be like, you know, nice. And we get there and like walk right up to the canyon, and then this is the view. And I was like, oh no, like you literally can't see any of the canyon. This is an absolute disaster, right? All this work for nothing. I was so upset. So we might revisit that little trip in a later slide, right? So sometimes when we first arrive on scene, it's like, ugh, like this doesn't feel like it's going so well, or I'm disappointed, it's not living up to my expectations. But sometimes those can turn around. So something that I think is really, really important as you embark on this new journey, or really any new journey in our lives, is to really go into anything new with a sense of curiosity. Because if we think back to any time in our lives that we've been horribly devastated or disappointed, usually what that means is that what we're experiencing in reality is not in line with kind of that movie we played in our head of it and those expectations that we had. So having unrealistic expectations can really lead to disappointment. And when we're entering something new, we have no experience with that. So it's really hard to create a purely realistic expectation in our minds. Sometimes we're a little bit off. So how do we do that? The strategy that I personally like to use when I'm trying to manage my own expectations is I try to look at whatever it is, kind of like a science experiment, and being really open to just any and all possibilities. And I can remember, like in elementary school or junior high, when we would do like science fair day, and you make your hypothesis, right? So you kind of have an idea in your head of like, okay, I think this is how it's going to go. But if your hypothesis doesn't come true, you don't trash the whole science experiment, right? You just report what really happened and you kind of move on, and you usually learn things, whether or not the hypothesis comes to fruition or not. So that's how I like to reframe things. And I find that that can be kind of helpful in getting into that more open-minded mindset. And I'm like, okay, it's just an experiment. I'm open to whatever. We're going to kind of see how it goes. And it's really important to remind ourselves that grad school, and honestly, pretty much anything in life, is temporary. Everything is temporary. If you're having a really, really bad day or a bad month or a bad semester, it's temporary. Always is. If we look back over our whole life, every feeling that we've had, whether it was an uncomfortable feeling like anger or disappointment or sadness, or really excited, it's all temporary. It's constantly fluctuating, So sometimes, when we're in grad school, these are very rigorous programs, and it's so easy to get overwhelmed and feel like it's just never going to end, and the work is never going to end, and we're never going to have enough time. So it's really important to remember, in order to keep our motivation up, that over a lifetime, the years that we spend in grad school are actually kind of short. They're kind of like a short little blip. It can feel like forever when we're in it, but it really is all temporary. So I think reminding yourself of that pretty actively can be really helpful. Okay, back to the Grand Canyon. So we get there, it's dreary. I'm disappointed, of course. I'm upset with myself. I feel stupid for not checking the weather. So we can, mulled about. We found some little room with artifacts or information in it, and kind of wandered around. And then went back. This is taken from the exact same vantage point as that first picture, literally probably 15 or 20 minutes later. And the clouds, obviously, as you can see, started to dissipate, and there was a freaking rainbow coming out of the canyon, and it was so beautiful, as you can see. So sometimes you just have to wait it out a little bit. And sometimes you don't even have to wait that long. And then something really, really great happens. It was actually more beautiful than I had imagined. It actually exceeded my expectations. So that's my Grand Canyon parable. So with our expectations, we kind of want to have a nice balance. We don't want to, imagine all bad things are going to happen. We don't want to fool ourselves into thinking all good things are going to happen. So we want to kind of balance. So one area that needs to balance is kind of going into this expecting to succeed. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to succeed necessarily, but kind of going into it with the belief of, I can get into any situation here and kind of figure out how to succeed, right? So some ways to practice that and really help us to believe that are practicing positive self-talk. Humans, we're kind of the same with ourselves with anything else. You know how we're much more likely to call and complain to a restaurant manager if we have a negative experience than we are to call and give accolades if we have a good experience. We do the same thing to ourselves. We really tend to highlight things we feel like, are weaker points for us, or that we didn't do well, or mistakes that we made. And we want to try to flip that switch into highlighting things that we like about ourselves, things we do well, things that are positive. But that takes really a lot of practice. It's kind of one of those things I always tell people I'm working with, if we're working on this, like, that is such an easy thing to say, and it is simple in theory. But to make ourselves really do that takes a ton of practice. You have to keep reminding yourself to do that, whether it's saying it out loud or talking, well about yourself when you're having conversations with other people instead of, downplaying what you're doing. Or some people, write little affirmations like on Post-its and put them places. So it's all kind of different for each of us, and you can find what works best for you, as long as you're making sure to take the time to give yourself, kudos for things that you're doing well, or good things about you, or skills that you have. And it can also be really helpful just in general to kind of look for the good and be grateful. And I know everybody talks about that, and I feel like it's kind of become like this cliched part of, self-care and things like that. But it really, really does make such a huge difference. Some people do practices like, okay, at the end of the day, I'm going to write down 3 things I'm grateful for. And that can be really, really helpful. Some people have a hard time kind of sticking to that ritual. Again, it's different for all of us, but finding a way to kind of look for the good and be on the lookout for things that are going well or things that we're grateful for can kind of help us in general get into that positive headspace, where we're noticing good things in the world around us, good things about our lives, and then hopefully starting to notice good things about ourselves more and more naturally. So that can go a long way in our own mental wellness, of course. But to balance that out, we also have to expect a little bit of failure, because we're not machines or robots. We're people, and we're doing something new and something difficult. So it would be pretty wild to expect that we're not going to make mistakes, maybe fail some exams. Those things happen to all of us, right? So there's going to be bad days. There are going to be days you feel unmotivated. There's going to be days you feel frustrated. And just remember, those are temporary, and remember that most people are going through that. I feel like probably one of the biggest themes that I've seen over the years working with graduate students here in the health sciences, no matter what college they're coming from, is, there's kind of this adjustment period into the rigors of graduate school, and expectations are different. A lot of times the strategies that we used to be successful as undergrads need to be tweaked a little bit, and it takes a little time to get our footing. And that can be really, really hard to cope with, because here you are, anybody in graduate school, you've been performing at a certain level, right? Because you're here. So we already know you're good students, and it can be really hard when we're not used to struggling to face some struggles. But it happens so often, so often to people. And, you bounce back from it. And you got to remember too, people may not be sharing with you their own struggles. We tend to kind of keep those a little bit close to the vest. They might be not be sharing their struggles, mistakes that they've made, but we all make them. One that I like to share that I made that felt really devastating at the time and embarrassing. But now, like, I literally never think about it unless I happen to be talking about this topic. When I was in my doctorate program, I was pretty much done with everything. I was ready to graduate in May. And again, I'm not great always at like attention to detail. And I missed an email that went through with some paper that had to be signed and turned in prior to graduation by some deadline in order to graduate in May. And I missed it, and I didn't realize till like a week later. I talked to one of my professors and she said, oh, just, contact them, and I bet you that they'll, understand and kind of give you a pass. And they did not. So I had to wait until December to graduate, even though I was all done. So I was like, oh my gosh, I lost, 7 months, and I feel so stupid and what an idiot, and that negative self-talk. And like I said, like at the moment that felt so terrible and I felt so awful about myself. And I don't feel like it has literally affected my life in reality at all. And nobody cares that I missed that email and graduated 7 months later. And like I said, I don't even think about it anymore. So the things that seem really big in the moment aren't really all that big. And just remember, obviously I don't share that with everybody, so people wouldn't know. Everybody thinks we're on this kind of straight and narrow path, and that's not always the way it goes. So little failure is totally normal, and it's totally okay. Okay, so some other strategies. It's really, really important to, and now is a good time to do it because you're just, getting ready to gear up for the academic part. It's really important to understand what is your natural working style. I feel like that's another big theme that I've seen over the years is, a lot of times we compare ourselves to how other students are kind of navigating the program, either in terms of timeline or just kind of their daily routines, their daily study routines, how much or how little they're taking on. And we just do these comparisons, which is very human of us. But if we're not doing what other folks look like they're doing, we feel like, oh no, maybe I'm not on the right track, maybe I'm doing this wrong. And that can cause a lot of really undue stress, right? So understanding what is your natural working style as far as academics and as far as balancing, many of you probably have a lot of other things in your life to balance as well. And what feels natural to you? Do you like to stay up really late and do your studying, or do you like to get it done first thing in the morning? Do you sit down for a big chunk of time, or do you break it up throughout the day? We're all just so different. And so really taking some time to be intentional about what works for you is really important. And the way that I feel like that really can impact our mental health is that we're not fighting with our natural tendencies all the time and trying to kind of fit into this certain box that we don't fit into. And you may find as things get going that like, okay, what I thought would work for me is not working for me. And that's fine too. You just got to be willing to kind of experiment with what works. That flexibility is super duper important as far as our coping with things. Goals. I love goals very, very much. I think they're really important. Goals are kind of what get us out of bed, get us going to class, getting us to do our work. They're super important. But like anything, you can always have too much of a good thing. It can kind of go into toxic amounts if we're inflexible. So again, this is another area where flexibility becomes really, really important. So with goals, it is really, really important to really kind of get specific as far as what are my current goals, and kind of get that clarity, because that's really important, because knowing that is kind of what can get us through some of the days we feel less motivated, when we're not feeling so hot, or we feel like it's never going to end. Identifying that is super important. But the flexibility piece comes in a couple ways. We want to keep in mind that, you know, we all might have the same goal, right? Or you all have the same goal, right? Like, okay, I'm going to get through this graduate program, graduate within a certain amount of time, and then off to whatever the next step is, right? But that's going to look really different for all of you. For some of you, it might take a little longer. For some of you, it might take a little less time. Your day-to-day might look really, really different from how you picture that it might. So just keeping in mind that there are lots of different ways to kind of end up at that same destination, right? And really being willing to change your goals as you grow and change. You know, so many times, you know, we might think, okay, I think I want to kind of study, you know, this area, kind of specialize in this. And we have this idea of what it's going to be like. And sometimes it's just not what we thought it was going to be, and we don't enjoy it. And I would challenge you to really be honest with yourself about that, if that happens to be something that you experience. I know I've certainly experienced that a few times throughout my career, especially. And just being willing to be honest with ourselves of like, okay, this is not it for me. This doesn't feel good. And being willing to say, that's okay. And I'm going to go try out something else. You know, and sometimes in trying that new thing, we discover something we never thought that we would love. And we end up really, really loving it. You know, I know for me, for example, I never, ever thought that I was the type of person who wanted to work in corrections or in detention at all. And I was kind of at a point where I was like, kind of trying to figure out my next career move. And a previous colleague contacted me and said, hey, there's a per diem position at the Juvenile Detention Center. I love it. Are you interested? And I was kind of like, well, not really. But she loved it so much that I was like, okay, I'll go try it out. And I was there for about 4 years, and I really, really ended up loving it. And I actually got asked to take over for the director of behavioral health there from my per diem position. So I ended up kind of running that program for several years, which like I never thought that I would do, but I loved it. I loved working with that population. So that was like a cool little surprise. So we just need to be really willing to explore things and change paths if we need to. That's totally okay. And it's important for our happiness. All right, self-care. So self-care is another area that I feel like gets a lot of hype, right? There's always like tons of articles and podcasts and YouTube videos on self-care and how important it is. And it is important. I feel like when we talk about it so much, almost we kind of like don't listen to how important it is anymore. So it is super important. And the cool thing about it is it can be anything you want it to be. Something that, you know, how I define self-care and makes me feel good might make you feel worse and terrible. And you need to do something totally different. So that's another area where, you know, kind of experimentation, figuring out what works for you is important. Kind of the thing to remember from the mental health standpoint is, unfortunately, the most important self-care is kind of boring. I am the first to admit it. But these are absolutely foundational to our overall wellness, and especially our mental wellness. So it's the boring things like getting exercise and not eating only McDonald's for every meal, getting some good nutrition in. Those things, they're not glamorous. They're not necessarily fun for everybody, but super important to keep us feeling good, physically and mentally. Making sure we're getting in enough rest and relaxation, getting some personal time in, that can kind of fall by the wayside in these programs because we feel like, oh God, I have all these assignments to do and I need to be studying and I need to be at my internship and maybe working and being with my family and social life and all of that. So remembering to schedule a little time to just kind of be you is really important and very needed. Taking time to kind of feel connected or connect with spirits, and by that I don't necessarily mean in a religious way, but more like feeling just like you're doing something or you're a part of something meaningful to you. So for some people that very well might be taking part in a religious community or engaging in your religion. It could also be, going for a walk, connecting with nature, connecting with animals, connecting with people, volunteering, whatever makes you feel connected, and like you're engaging in things that are meaningful on kind of a larger scale. And this is another big theme, of course, that I see is students not taking care of themselves, even in small ways, and that inevitably leads to burnout and to being in not such a healthy mental state. And often I think what I see is, humans can tend to be kind of all or nothing thinkers. So we're like, well, I don't have time to do all the things I feel like I should be doing for self-care. So then we don't do anything for self-care and we just kind of run ourselves ragged. So a strategy I always suggest is pick, to start off with, even if you're feeling completely overwhelmed, just identify the one thing that you feel like is the most important thing in your life that kind of just is your outlet, or that you enjoy the most and kind of like chills you out the most, right? I mean, for some people that might be like mountain climbing. That's not it for me, but for other people it might be reading, or spending time with certain people, doing something artistic. Just, everybody's different. So pick what for you feels like, okay, if I could only pick one, this is what I would pick. And just make sure that you're scheduling in time to do that thing. And then you can always kind of fill in more stuff. But a lot of times we don't make any of it a priority and then we don't do any of it. So just commit to one thing that's going to kind of become your non-negotiable and schedule that in just like you would schedule in classes or studying, or an event that you have to go to. Really make that a priority, and it can make such a huge difference just in kind of refilling our like psychological tank a little bit. Goes a long way. Balance. I've always had this meme in my orientation talks, and I've actually never seen this movie, but I was told this is Thanos, I believe, but I like the meme because this is about how I always studied. But balance is what we're talking about here. And just preemptively, when I say balance, I don't mean every single part of your life is going to get the same amount of attention and the same amount of time and effort, because that's pretty much impossible. So we just kind of want to keep it kind of like equitably balanced and keep things from like completely toppling over. The next few years, because you've chosen to be here and obviously this is a priority for you. If our life were a pie of all our different life areas, your academic life is obviously going to take up kind of the biggest chunk of the pie for you right now. And that's totally cool, totally okay. We just don't want to completely eradicate any other parts of the pie. That we might have to make some of them smaller than we might normally choose to. We just don't want to, completely take them out of the picture. So kind of now is a good time probably to identify, what, of these different life areas. And I just listed some here. I mean, there's some people who study life areas who say like there's 18 life areas, and that's a lot, but these are kind of the basics. There's kind of like our academic life, if we work outside of that or have other kind of obligations. Then we have like our family, our friends, ourself. So that might be, you know, any personal growth, hobbies, things like that, or our spirituality, and then our physical health as well. So we just want to make sure that we are still attending to those things, even though academics might get top billing for at least the next few years. We don't want to let it take over everything, because that's not healthy. And then you'd probably pretty quickly kind of hate your academic life if there was nothing else. All right. Learning to say no, but also when to say yes. So obviously, they have a finite amount of time. We each only have a certain number of hours in the day. And, you know, as you go through the next few years, every semester is probably going to kind of look a little bit different in terms of what is required of you, how much time and effort and energy it takes. And it can get easy to kind of fall into this pattern of either saying no to everything else, or saying yes to everything that anybody asks us to do, and then we're just completely overwhelmed. So we need to have balance there too. So I'll share with you a strategy that I like to use. I find that it works well for me, so you might find that this works well for you, or you can steal this from me and kind of make it your own based on your own priorities. But I like this strategy. So in this strategy, you kind of set your default answer to no, but you first kind of filter through a few questions. The ones that I ask is, will this help me reach my goals? Is this something that I will just really enjoy? Because something doesn't have to be like productive or helping us reach our goals to still be valuable. There's a ton of value in just doing things that we love and enjoy. So if it's something that we'll really enjoy, or is it something new that might help me better myself that I kind of want to try out and see if I like it? So if you answer yes to any of those, then I would say yes. But if it's not something that I'm interested in, not something I enjoy, and it's not going to help me reach any of my goals, then basically it's just kind of a time suck, and why would I go and do that? Doesn't make any sense. So that's the filter that I like to pass things through to make those decisions. And it's also just important to remember that working yourself to exhaustion is not a badge of honor, and it will not help you succeed academically. I hear all the time, you know, oh, I really want to go do X, Y, or Z, but I just feel guilty and I feel like I need to be studying all the time, you know, or I feel like I have to, you know, kind of burn the night at both ends studying, and I'm not getting enough sleep, but I just feel guilty or I feel anxious if I'm not just studying. And I promise you that will only impact your academics in a negative way. And I really like to try to help people kind of reframe things like the self-care that we talked about, getting good sleep, getting physical exercise, giving your brain a break as a part of your study plan, because I think that's not traditionally how we think of a study plan. We think of a study plan as like, okay, well, here's a schedule of topics that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to sit and read about them or do practice tests or write or whatever. But if we're feeling terrible and our health isn't on par and we're completely exhausted, all that work and energy that we're expending, you know, we're losing so much of it, because we're less likely to be able to retain information. We're less likely to be able to focus. Like, we're just not on our game. So it's really, really important to remember that all these other aspects of our lives, they work together to help us be a better, higher functioning student. So that's just kind of like a little paradigm shift that I think is really important and valuable. Okie dokie, so warning signs. You know, and warning signs can really range, right? One of the things that I do throughout the year is I teach mental health first aid a few times a year, and that course kind of goes through different mental health challenges that are kind of more subtle, and then we'd walk all the way through to crisis situations such as, suicidal ideation, harm to self and others, that kind of thing. But often, more subtle things are the very first things that we need to pay attention to in ourselves. The basics are the first to go almost all the time. So again, it's kind of those boring things like sleeping, our appetite, our physical energy level. We really want to pay attention to any changes in those that we're experiencing. And that kind of goes either way, so we might start having insomnia, or we might start, sleeping 11 hours a day when normally, we were getting 7 or 8, or a change in our appetite one way or another. If you notice oh man, I'm suddenly just chronically unmotivated, or I just don't have physical and mental energy, those are really things to kind of tune into. You might even just kind of want to do little self check-ins maybe once a week and be like, how am I feeling in these areas? Because the sooner that we kind of catch ourselves falling into those types of behaviors, the quicker we can kind of back up and get back on track. So that's really, really important to pay attention to those really early warning signs. Okay, so to talk for a few minutes about the services provided in my program. It's just me, so it's when I say my program, it really is just my program. So I would be the person that you would be speaking with, and I'm totally separate from main CAPS on campus. You of course can utilize that as a resource as well. They have a lot of additional resources. They have a much bigger staff, and they have a bunch of additional resources that you can tap into as well. But I specifically work with health sciences students kind of with a focus on, the unique challenges that we might face in the health sciences. So I can do assessments and kind of see, what's going on, see what your therapeutic needs might be. I provide brief individual therapy, and if we're working together and we kind of decide, you need longer term therapy, or kind of a more traditional longer term, or delving into some trauma or something like that. I provide referrals all the time to either campus or community resources. I'm happy to help you guys find long-term ongoing therapists in the community, or any other services that you might need either on campus or off campus. And throughout the year, I do trainings on all kinds of different mental health and wellness topics, and workshops and things like that. And as I mentioned, I teach the mental health first aid course. I teach that at least 3 times a year. So if you're interested in something like that, it's an 8-hour course on so many different topics. We pack a lot into that 8 hours, but it's really about how to intervene if you ever needed to. If someone was having a mental health challenge or a crisis. So you can be on the lookout for that in your emails in the future. And all of these services are totally no cost to you. It's provided for you by the colleges, which is really, really wonderful. So it's no cost and it's totally confidential. Like I said, I'm totally separate entity from CAPS. This does not, if you were to come to see me, it does not become a part of your student record in any way. I'm the only person who has access to the records that I keep. So it's very, very private, confidential, no cost to you, which is really wonderful. And I work totally remotely, obviously, since the pandemic, and it's actually worked out so well. We've got Zoom down now, I think most of us, and it just makes scheduling really easy because as long as you have privacy and an internet connection, it makes it very easy and it's really nice and private. So, so I do all things through HIPAA compliant Zoom. And if you ever feel like you need an appointment, you can go to this link. I'm assuming maybe they will send this out and correct me if I'm wrong. I can email it to Michael if not. So you just go to this link here and you can click on the student referral and that'll send me an email or you can just send me an email directly. It all comes through as an email to me. And then it just goes directly to me. It doesn't go through anybody else. And I'll email you back. We'll set up a time and kind of go from there. And I always like to give people some other resources because I'm not here 24/7, of course. I work Monday through Thursday from 8 to 6. Pima County Crisis Line is 24/7 in Pima County. And they can be reached at 520-622-6000. And then CAPS does have an after hours line and an on-call counselor 24/7 as well, which is a really great resource. And that number is 520-621-3334. And it looks like I might have missed something in the chat. Okay. Oh, thank you, Kim. You should put the link there. So I made it with 4 minutes to spare. Does anybody have any questions for me on anything that I talked about and it was kind of a whirlwind, or any services, or ways to get in touch? Any questions that I can answer for the last couple minutes? And if not, that's cool too. You can always email me as well. So I'll go ahead and stop my sharing and come back to get back to normal here. There we are. All right.
Any questions for Jenna before we wrap up this portion of orientation?
I must have been super clear.
You did a great job as always, Jenna. And really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us.
My pleasure.
Telling us, about the important services that you provide and giving us. I always learn something from you. So yeah, just thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm always happy. So all of you feel free to reach out anytime and good luck. Have a great first week next week. Can't believe it's time. So thank you for having me.